A very good day to all. My name is Nilay Patel, and the topic of discussion today is A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. It is written by James Joyce. Let's look, let's know about the story, historical context about the author, and plot detail in and plot detail. I mean, so before reading the novel, before knowing the plot, we should understand its historical context. And before the historical context, let us look at some details that becomes necessary. It is written by James Joyce. It is published in 1914 to 1916. For 2 years, serialized, and then it was published as a book. So, fiction, Bildungsroman, like coming of age. You will see the character. What Bildungsroman especially is a German term, and you see a character development of some person. Like here, our main guy, Stephen. So his character development is being portrayed here in this novel. Narrator is limited, omniscient. Final chapter uses Stephen's first person's diary, so it is in past tense. And before moving to the plot detail, we must look at the historical context of the novel. The novel is set in the Ireland at the turn of the 20th century amid Catholic Protestants' tension over the Irish independence from the British rule. To understand this point, like we see that Ireland has had two major religious communities. One was Catholic, a majority of Irish people, and many wanted Irish independence, and Protestants, and they were often a British authority, and the government at that time, Ireland was colonized by England, and British authority were Protestants. And these religious divisions were not only about faith, but they were also about politics, identity, and social status. And in this novel, particularly, Stephen grows up in a Catholic environment and constantly struggles with religion, guilt, and personal freedom. So, so Irish independence is the main focal point of this novel. And for centuries, Britain controlled Ireland politically and economically. And many Irish nationalists demanded self-government, they demanded freedom, and they demanded independence from the Britain. And the political struggle forms an important background in the novel, because our main protagonist, Stephen, grows up hearing arguments about Irish nationalism and politics at home as well as at school. And so British government since 16th century had failed the Irish during the mid 19th century famine, causing around 1 million deaths. Basically, I wanted to say that England began the extending control over Ireland from 500 onwards, and over time, Irish land were taken by the British rulers, and Irish culture and language weakened, and many Irish people felt oppressed under British administration. And the long colonial history created an anger and nationalism feeling among the Irish population. So द ग्रेट फेमाइन की बात हो रही है यहाँ पे. सो वन ऑफ द मोस्ट ट्रेजिक इवेंट इन द हिस्ट्री. होता क्या है कि ए पोटैटो डिसीज़ जो डिस्ट्रॉय कर देती है क्रॉप्स को, एंड सिंस देन आयरिश फेमाइन आयरलैंड में एक भुखमरी आ जाती है. सो 1 मिलियन लोगों की मौत होती है, और मिलियंस लोग इमिग्रेट कर जाते हैं कंट्रीज़ लाइक अमेरिका में. एंड मेरी आयरिश पीपल believed that British government failed to help them properly, because Britishers were ruling Ireland and they should have helped Ireland people properly. Because of this, there is an anti-British settlement, stronger anti-British settlement in the people, in the masses, in the herds of the Ireland. So some of the nationalists, some of the famous nationalist leader of Ireland, like in एक की बात होती है चार्ल्स स्टीवर्ट पार्नेल, a leader who fought for home rule and for Ireland. Why he is important? Because he is a symbol of Irish hope and leadership, and many Irish Catholics admired him deeply. And his political career collapsed after news of his adulterous relationship became public. So there is a Dante is one character in this novel. He is aunt of our main hero, and she talks about this adulterous rendezvous of Parnell. And after that, Stephens somehow, who was believing him to be his real hero, somehow have a negative view of Parnell. So home rule movement, there is also a home rule movement, and we should understand the home rule movement. Like, home rule movement demanded that Ireland should have its own parliament and control over the domestic affair instead of being ruled directly from the London, because the people, the problem and the scenarios that Ireland face is distant from the London, and Ireland should have particularly their own parliament, and that would raise the real voices of the people, the real circumstances and the suffering of the people. It did not initially demanded complete independence, but they wanted a greater autonomy, and Parnell was one of the strongest leader, and he supported for this um, home rule movement. So Joyce is one of the key modernist writer alongside T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf, Ezra Pound, all united by a mission to break a literary convention after World War. So modernism भी यहाँ पे है. So many type of narrative structure is forming here. Like, the novel heavily relies on stream of consciousness. वर्जीनिया वुल्फ ने इसको यूज़ किया है अपने नॉवेल्स में. स्ट्रीम ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस में कि राइटर के दिमाग में, कैरेक्टर के दिमाग में क्या चल रहा है, और एक बहुत विविड, गोटेस्क कभी कभी, बट बहुत ही लंबा चौड़ा डिस्क्रिप्शन, व्हाट वी से होच पोच चलता रहता है राइटर्स के दिमाग में, उसको दिखलाया गया है. ये पब्लिश किया गया 1914 से 1916 में, रियलाइज़ किया गया था, फिर बुक के फॉर्म में पब्लिश हुआ. And this was important historical period because World War was happening, old traditions were breaking out because of modernism, and writer began experimenting with the new form of the literary traditions. So Belden's Roman एक ये novel है, a novel that shows the psychological, emotional, intellectual growth of a young person. और इस novel में आप देखेंगे कि Stephen Dedalus grows from a child into a young intellectual. So now we talk about the biography of James Joyce. He was born in February 1882 in Dublin, suburb of Dublin, Catholic family. Henrik Ibsen is a Norwegian playwright. The Doll's House. You might be knowing about it. So he self-taught Norwegian to read Ibsen in original form, and he spoke 17 languages. And major work were Dubliner, Portrait, Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake, and Portrait's character Stephen Dedalus reappears in Ulysses. Okay, so Portrait of Artist is England, 1914 to 16. You know, Death, Zurich. His education was sent at age of 6 to Klongwood. That also appears in the novel as well. In Jesuit boarding school, then withdrew due to poverty. Later attended to University College Dublin, earning a bachelor degree. And Portrait is widely considered a semi-autobiographical narrative. Like Stephen Joyce had an alcoholic father, attended Jesuit institution, and later left Ireland, and lived in most of the adult life in Europe, and with wife Brankel, nearly blind in his final years. So we talk about this modernism and all this, how it was written. So another thing is, what is Jesuit? Jesuit education, your Jesuit institution. So Joyce's experience in Jesuit schools deeply shaped in his thinking. So Stephen Dedalus studies in Jesuit institution, struggles with the Catholic guilt and religious pressure, and eventually rebels against the religious authority. So these are also some Christian faith schools. Catholic institutions. So let's move to the mm, move to the major character. You know Stephen Dedalus, and Simon Dedalus is Stephen's father. Mary Dedalus is Stephen's pious mother, and Cranley is Stephen's closest friend at university. And Cranley is the first person that Stephen tells for his decision to leave once Stephen of the isolation and exile. Ahead, we will look the stories in detail as we move on. So, Emma Clary is Stephen Adlai's love interest over nearly a decade, 10 years. He writes poetry about her, fantasizes about her, and though he barely speaks to her directly. And Father Arnal, Jesus' teacher at the Clongoves. This is so tricky. Clongoves. Clongoves. Mm, and later Belvedere delivers the fire and brimstone ceremonies on hell that shake Stephen at the core of the temporality. These all events will be looked when we discuss the plot in detail. So, this all the things you can see plot overview in a gist. So let's move to the chapter one. In the chapter one of the novel opens with Stephen Dedalus as a very small child, almost like a baby, baby like a baby, experiencing the world through sacred sensation rather than the clear logical thoughts. So he's he's talking about the stream of consciousness, how the mind of the child is working, and this is the stream of consciousness. A technique immediately marks the Stephen as a unique perspective character. So he notices the tiny details around him. The child notices the tiny details around him, like the sound, colors, movements, small smells, fragments of the languages. And his mind also, the child minds also records random impressions, like mm, it records cow and the childish stories, childish stories. mm, wetting of the bed, the sound of the music like horn pie, horn pie, horn pie, horn pie, and dancing images, voices of family members, and bit of nursery languages. And the opening passages feels very fragmented and dreamlike because the representation of the string of consciousness. And instead of a proper narrative, the reader enters the Stephen's mind directly and experiences the reality, how the mind shapes it. And Joyce uses this technique to set the tone, to move away from the old classical way of storytelling to stay and after the World War into the phase of the modernism. The early sections focus on the family life, school experiences, fear, punishment, religion, and growing self-awareness. Mm, So, and the novel traces the Stephen's journeys from innocent childhood to intellectual artist awakening. So, these are the foreseen events that are going to happen in the novel. So, and Stephen is often bullied and held accountable for his action by his mother. And the narrative then shifts to the Clongoves. Mm, at Clongoves Catholic Boys School, where he suffers many torment, he gets tormented at Clongoves. Stephen struggles to understand the constant daily noise and confusion around him. There is a constant daily noise, there is a chaos around him, and he fails to understand that. He tries to figure out who is troubling him, and while also facing punishment and humiliation, he faces punishment and humiliation. The universe around him becomes part of his torment, and Stephen feels trapped by labels and expectations that were placed upon him. Suffering creates a feeling of guilt and isolation, and by end of this section, Stephen becomes a deeply withdrawn and emotionally disturbed child. His illness partly symbolizes his inner suffering and also reflects the family growing involvement in the politics, because his family matters. Discusses about the Irish rebellion and Irish independence that we talked about in the historical context. And during the Christmas dinner, a the glasses incident happened at a school. Glasses incident. He is beaten by a boy, and his glasses fall, and they broke. So, maybe I will talk about it. So during the Christmas dinner, during what happens during the Christmas dinner, um, during the Christmas dinner, a heated argument takes place about the scandal surrounding the Charles Stewart Parnell. And while the Charles Stewart Parnell is greatly admired, his father, his aunt Dante, tells that he is found in a very compromising adulterous position. Then the discussion focuses on how the Catholic Church uses the Parnell affair to influence and damage Irish politics. The scene introduces the theme of Irish history, nationalism, and oppression under the British rule. And two opposing political sides emerges, like those who support the Parnell with Irish independence and those who support the dominance of the British government. And another conflict also appear in the novel. People who approve of the Catholic Church using the pulpit to direct political decision, and people who believe in Catholicism is inseparably connected with the Irish politics, like we see. The argument exposes the deep political and religious division in the Irish society. And so the Catholic Church and Mr. Cassie defends Parnell. Stephen witnessed the passion of adult in the political and religious conflict. So at at a young age, you see Stephen begins developing political ambition, and because of the family, the ambition is shaped because of the family, and his views about the Parnell and Irish politics changes as he grows older and gains deeper understanding of the adulthood. And Stephen becomes intentionally religious during the later phase of the life. He grows increasingly isolated and withdrawn from the people around him. His attention remains fixed mainly on his own inner thoughts and emotions, you see, often ignoring the other who try to communicate with him. So, Stephen experiences a growing sense of emotion and a spiritual struggle throughout the process, and he gradually realizes that the conflict around him are not simply political issues but deeply personal and difficult to fully understand. So, he is not able to make a sense of place in this world. The growing awareness increases his inner confusion and emotional intensity, and he is always in turmoil. So, at school, what happens that at school, when he goes to school, he sees some boys are caught in the sexual misconduct and they face punishment such as flogging or expulsion, and flogging is like very dangerous punishment and very painful punishment. Stephen imagines the physical pain and humiliation of such punishment in great detail, and his constant reflection and imagination reveals his artistic and sensitive temperament, like how he is imagining those punishment and how it reflects it is in his art. A school supervisor, what does the school supervisor? The school supervisor flogs him unnecessarily because his Stephen glasses are broken. You see the glasses incident, glasses are broken, he cannot see properly or complete his work. Stephen gathers the courage and to protest against the injustice. His classmates supports him and encourages him that yeah, you should raise your voice against injustice. And Stephen explains this incident to the rector. He says this to the rector, and rector promises him to speak to the teacher about the unfair punishment. Stephen feels victorious after standing up for himself, and his classmates celebrate him like a hero afterwards. So he is celebrated as a hero afterward. Now let's move to the chapter 2. Let's move to the chapter 2 and let's recall his life at Dublin. So Stephen spends summer vacation at home and he walks around with Uncle Charles daily. Stephen closely observes the spoken languages and rhymes all around him, and he mocks battles reveals Stephen's heroic self-image. So the mock battle, everything he reflects his heroic self-image. And the Count of the Monte Cristo, the Count of the Monte Cristo, the novel he is very infatuated with, is a French classic novel, and he imagined himself in the position of the Mount Cristo, how he's imprisoned, and his love with Mercedes. Stephen imagined himself isolated like Monte Cristo, and his financial troubles create anxiety about the family stability. And Stephen questions his future economic and spiritual place where he will go, because everything is decided on the family economic and family's financial condition. And milk deliveries make. And he chooses to milk deliveries, and that reflects Stephen's on the working life. The The Mount of Monte Cristo has Mercedes, the love interest of the Count, and Mercedes become a part of Stephen's romantic imagination. Mercedes is something that the Monte Cristo never gets, and because of her, every trouble he faces and ultimately indirectly relates to the plot. So literature becomes Stephen imagination and escape from the reality, and artistic imagination increasingly separates Stephen from the others. And the Dedalus family, so mm, move to the Dublin. So Dedalus family is ruined by Simon's financial failures, and so they move to the Dublin and they rent a small house there, and it's talking Stephen and making him rethink about his past memories and childhood experience. So old memories started to resurface, including the strange whispers in the hallway and mysterious scenes from the Black Rock's house, and strengthening his artistic imagination. And Stephen visits relatives and attends child's birthday parties with his mother, but he remains emotionally distant from all these people around him. And instead of participating socially, what does Stephen do? Stephen observe people and and re- and then behavior and then conversation their behavior and then conversation. He record it mentally, and a brief interaction with the a girl awakens his senses a romantic feeling in Stephen. And though he still keeps an intellectual emotional distance from a real intimacy, so there is an emotional distance. And inspired by this emotion, what does Stephen do? Stephen buys paper and writes poetry in a romantic Byronic style, a Byronic hero, revealing his growing literary ambition and self-conscious imagination. And then we move to the Belvedere College. So at, at Belvedere School, Stephen performs in a Whitsuntide play. So, but his experience school at school is very artificial, and it's very mechanical, and it's emotionally distant. So Joyce describe these events um, very beautifully. Joyce also described the wooden sets, props, and performances to reflect the Stephen's growing detachment from ordinary social life. And the play becomes very important part because Stephen begins seeing art not as just an imitation of life, but something that creates its own reality. And it's very important in artistic creation. So we somehow get to know the artistic mind of Stephen now growing and breeding. So before the performance, classmate teases Stephen about a girl who comes to see him, but their joke does not affect his intense inner imagination. And Stephen increasingly withdrawn from the family, close friends, and religious expectation, preferring the privacy and isolation of his own emotional and artistic world. And his attraction toward the girl remains romanticized and distant. There is some kind of platonic thing is going on, and revealing his youthful tendency to idolize women rather than truly understand them. So he also longs he also longs for a long time with girl. So a long time with girl, and he's unaware of the process that he will go through when he will be alone with that girl, because he doesn't know what to do. So this type of revelation is also taking place. Mm. So Stephen now travels to the Cork, and Stephen is accompanied by his father. And during the and they wanted to sell their family property, and both experience the journey very differently. And Stephen, what does do? Spend most of the time. Simon spend most of the time drinking, remembering the university days, and avoiding the painful reality of financial decline, while touring the University of College York, his formal university. Simon repeatedly mentioned people and memories from the past, but Stephen realizes that his father's world has already disappeared and he is living in memory. And Stephen becomes embarrassed by Simon's drunken behavior and his storytelling and flirtation with the barmaids. Everything and all disturb him, and the trip deeply unsettles Stephen, increasing his fear that he may eventually become trapped in some failed and directionless life of his father. So, and what is happened now then the trip, after wasting the prize money and feeling the emotionally lost, Stephen finally enters into the Dublin red light district and sleeps with a prostitute. So first prostitute he sleeps with, and from now on he will start sleeping with prostitutes regularly. There is a major change in the novel. Now we move to the chapter 3 of the novel, and Stephen enters a period of interest intense self degradation and spiritual decline after repeatedly visiting to prostitute house in Dublin. And when what began as a temptation initially now become a regular habit, revealing that Stephen surrendered to physical desire and indulgence. He is surrendering himself to the physical desire, although he knows that his actions conflict with Catholic teaching. Like Catholic teaching forbids it, but also he continues without seriously mm, resisting them. And Stephen experiences a cold and detached attitude towards his own moral downfall and personal feelings, to desires per se, and his growing indifference towards sin like reflects his emotions, numbness, and spiritual confusion. And even while teaching religious lessons to younger students, Stephen no longer feels genuine guilt about betraying his faith. So you kind of see the change that Stephen is going in. Like mm, now, the the rector announces a lecture about Saint Francis Xavier and religious duty, and causing Stephen intense fear and anxiety. So when he know more about religion and what he has been doing, then he is very guilt ridden. Stephen fears confronting his sinful life and possibility of losing doubling worldly pleasure. So he goes to the Father Arnell and delivers the terrifying Father Arnell's it delivers a terrifying sermon describing the suffering and the punishment awaiting the sinner's life. So he get made very much frightened. The vivid description deeply disturbs him and fills him with horror, guilt, and spiritual panic. So Stephen imagines hell as a nightmare-like barren landscape, and it is filled with monstrous half-human figures. So monstrous half-goat, half-human creatures. So barren. So overwhelmed by this fear and this confusion, this guilt, he secretly goes to another church, confesses there he confesses his sins and completes his penance. जो repentance होता है, penance होता है, there he completes it, and he is spiritually cleansed and fully awakened by the life. So now in so his confession gives him temporary relief. So now we move to the chapter 4, and now we move to the chapter 4 of the story. And in chapter 4, Stephen fully embraces the training of the priesthood and believes religion may become his life's calling. So now he's training for the priesthood. Now he's feeling that the religion might become his final calling. Finally, he may able to settle down. But he finds comfort in strict spiritual discipline and imagine himself helping Saul escape purgatory through devotion and prayer. He's doing all kind of prayer and stuffs. And Stephen like suppresses all his physical desire and try to erase memories of his earlier sinful life through repentance. He does everything, and despite his religious dedication, he struggles to connect naturally with ordinary people and common social life because he's not made for that. He's an artistic mind, and Stephen interprets temptation as proof that his soul is still resisting evil and not completely fallen to sin. So he interprets the temptation as a proof that his soul is still resisting evil and is not completely fallen to sin. So even while trying to reform himself, Stephen continues doubting his own spiritual purity. I have amended my life, have I not? So he asked this type of question. He's in juxtaposition of things. He's in confusion. So Stephen realizes that he can never truly become a priest. Now there is another realization is there, that doubt surfaces that he can never become a priest, and the teacher praises Stephen's ability and suggests that he has a promising future in clergy, promoting deep reflection. So all those things is not for Stephen. While imagining the future seriously, Stephen understands that he feels no genuine calling for priesthood. So he returns home. And walking, he finds his family once again facing financial instability and possible eviction. And walking towards the beach, Stephen reflects on the religion, guilt, and identity and his growing attraction towards artistic freedom. So, on the Dublin street, he finally is facing eviction. He rushes to the sea and encounter. He feels flattened by their nicknames, calling him Deadless. So, this type of thing. Seeing a young girl in the water, so there is a wading girl. The climax of the chapter is that seeing a young girl standing in the water, his feeling awakens a moment of spiritual and artistic revelation, leading Stephen to embrace life. Embrace, not life, embrace life. Take beauty and his future as an artist instead of priesthood. So, the visions fills him with the transcendent joy, feeling as an artist who has stuck by inspiration. He understands the moment that his calling is art, not God. He walks to the water edge, embraces the world entirely. Now we will move to the chapter 4, the last chapter of this novel. So in chapter 4, Stephen leads a restless and unstructured university life, which suits him better than the rigid, disciplined church life. And his home life remains poor and chaotic and filled with pawn tickets, argument, and financial decline is at the brinks of this novel. And at university, Stephen discusses aestheticism with the dean of studies and who encourages part, practicality in completing his degree before pursuing art. So be practical. Stephen increasingly distanced himself from the families, from the expectations, from the religious pursuits and social conformity, and he refuses both religious pressure and nationalist demands, rejecting attempt to force him into fixed identities. And wandering with Lynch, Stephen develops his theories about beauty and art, fully moving towards his identity as an independent artist. So this is the university life. So now, Stephen awakens from a euphoric dream in which he imagines his life from a perspective of seraphim, the highest order of angels. Now, the dream connects spiritual love with his romantic feelings for the Emma for the 10 years of the love. The, then he starts to pen poem like Villanelle dedicated to her, and he has been in love with Emma for roughly a decade, and then Stephen attempts to capture the beauty and emotion revealed in his dream, inspired by the vision of Emma. So Stephen argues that in eternally about whether he behaved too coldly towards Emma in the past, whether he was very too cold, and reflecting on the years of admiration for her. Stephen believes his imaginative and artistic love is deeper than the ordinary romantic attraction. So this kind of affection over years and years is greater than anything else. Stephen realizes that. And Stephen tells Cranley about this, that he will neither perform Easter duties nor pursue priesthood, and he plans to leave Ireland. He finally plans to leave the Ireland. And Cranley warns Stephen that such choices in your life will bring loneliness, separation, exile from society and family. But instead of fearing all those things, Stephen accepts isolation as necessary for the artistic freedom and independence. Stephen records diary entries describing his final days in the Dublin, and the last part of the chapter are records of his diary entries and his emotional separation from the family, religion, and the nation. Meeting Emma on Grafton Street, Stephen openly declares his new artistic ambitions and changing life goals as he prepares to leave. As his mother helps him to pack things, Stephen makes his final declaration for the purpose, calling upon the Daedalus for his strength as he begins his journey toward becoming an artist. That's how we end this novel. And the major theme: artistic inspiration and identity, inner conflict, spiritual homelessness and exile, modernism and stream of consciousness, religious guilt and freedom, epiphany, the realization in the last part of the chapter. You will get to know about the symbols. You just take a screenshot of this, and you will read it. There is nothing to explain, and key concepts for the exam. Bolding's Roman, epiphany is something sudden realization that hits a particular character, and he completely changed the course of the action. And then autobiographical parallel is there between his life and Stephen's life, the author's life, and someone So, stream of consciousness, consciousness. I told you, exile as freedom, and modernism is the new mood of writing in that era. So, these are the things that you can go for here. And again, thank you for listening to me. Have a good day.